Welcome to Superhero Pow. I'm your host nerd, Tom Fremgen. You know, it's just about human nature to break things up into groups. In comic books, that usually means ages, or moreover, decades. And there have been 3 really great decades for comic books. The 1940s, when just about everything was created, the 1960s, with the birth of Marvel Comics, and the 1980s, with the DC Renaissance. So, in that vein, I thought it would be interesting to look at the best stuff DC put out in the 1980s. Stuff that still gets recycled today. Now, I'm not just talking about iconic stuff, or the best-selling stuff, or even the most beloved stuff. I'm talking about something that scores in all 3 categories. So, with that in mind, something you love dearly is probably not going to make the list. But seriously, there was so much frickin' good stuff put out by DC in the 1980s that the honorable mentions list is bigger than the top 10. I'm talking about Camelot 3000, Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, Jerry Conway's Justice League run, Paul Leavitt's Legion of Superheroes run, The Blue Devil, Amethyst, Roy Thomas's All-Star Squadron, and the Secret Origins series, Neil Gaiman's Sandman, Captain Carrot and the Zoo Crew, Legends, The Suicide Squad, The Omega Men, The Super Charming Amazing Man, their successful Star Trek run, Mike Barron's Flash, Grant Morrison's Animal Man, Cary Bates' Captain Atom, not to mention the amazing one-offs like Batman Son of the Demon, Arkham Asylum, The Killing Joke, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow, The History of the DC Universe, For the Man Who Has Everything. Seriously, how does one choose? Like this. Starting off with number 10, Justice League. After limping through the Detroit days, the Justice League of America was shattered in Legends, and then rebuilt, by writers Keith Giffen, J.M. DeMatteis, and soon-to-be superstar artist Kevin Maguire. Out were Superman and Wonder Woman, and in were Guy Gardner and the Blue Beetle. The team had more personality than ever, and it just started to bust over with character-driven humor, making a household term in the industry. The action may have suffered here and there, but the book was so much fun you had to forgive them. Number 9, The Question. DC Comics had gotten their hands on all the Charlton action heroes, Blue Beetle, Captain Atom, and The Question. Batman vet Denny O'Neil, with Dennis Cowan, an artist reinventing himself with amazing work, took a fairly dorky hero from the 60s to the gritty realism of the 80s, before it became a lazy cliché. Along with Frank Miller's work on Batman, O'Neil and Cowan Question helped redefine and basically coined the term street-level superhero. The Question was troubled and insightful, and Cowan's art gave it all a real tooth and feel. And it still stands as the character's best run ever. Number 8, Wonder Woman by George Perez. Before the crisis, Wonder Woman was nearly a joke. Her sales were bad, and DC just kept knocking out issues because they made so much licensing her merchandise. Then superstar artist George Perez wanted his chance to write. So DC let him turn Wonder Woman into a mythic action hero. Gone were the invisible jet and purple rays, and in were Greek gods and monsters. Along with amazing visuals, Perez injected humanity into Princess Diana. And basically overnight, Wonder Woman became a must-buy book. It's still considered Wonder Woman's best run ever, not counting her mega popularity in the 1940s. Number 7, Batman Year One. More fallout from the crisis. Batman's origin was retooled by superstar writer-artist Frank Miller. Joined by artist David Mazzucchelli, Miller sucked out all the rollicking action from Batman and turned him into the grim Avenger of the Night. Printed in Batman Comics number 404 to 407, Miller had cranked Batman and Gotham City itself up to 11 with this low-key and epically gritty tale, where Batman dealt with mobsters and corruption instead of supervillains. This story still stands as most TV shows and movies draw from it. And in comic books, it coined the term Year One for origin tales, which DC still uses today. Number 6, Superman and Action Comics by John Byrne. Marvel's golden boy, John Byrne, moved over to DC. again after the crisis, and did the unthinkable, reinvented Superman. At a manic pace of writing and drawing 2 comic books a month, Superman was now a hero for the modern world. Dorky Clark Kent was replaced with just average guy Clark Kent, and Superman was now Clark Kent farm boy, not Kal-El alien scientist boy. Nearly all of the confusing and often silly Superman mythology was stripped away as everything about Superman's world was streamlined. With help from writer Marv Wolfman, Lex Luthor was no longer a bald childhood foe of Superboy, but a very rich, corrupt business tycoon, the de facto ruler of Metropolis. To be sure, it divided longtime Superman fans, but it was a much-needed breath of fresh air for the Metropolis Marvel, in art as well as in story. Number 5. DC's Who's Who, the definitive directory of the DC Universe. It was DC's 50th anniversary in 1985, and they celebrated with rebooting their entire universe. And they marked the coming and going with their first ever Who's Who. Editors Len Wein, Robert Greenberger, and Marv Wolfman put together over 800 entries of nearly every DC character in 26 issues. While one can claim they easily stole the idea from Marvel, which published their own 15-issue handbook back in 1982, DC improved upon the idea with more artistic flair. While many of the entries are out of date today, it's a perfect time capsule of the DC Universe at its classic best. And you simply cannot call yourself a DC fanboy if you don't own a copy of this series. Number 4. Crisis on Infinite Earths. Perhaps the biggest comic book undertaking of all times. Writer Marv Wolfman spent over a year putting the pieces together before crafting the 12-issue miniseries itself. Wolfman would tease his new Teen Titans co-creator, George Perez, arguably the best artist of the 1980s, with his plans to remake the entire DC universe, from top to bottom, until George finally wanted to draw all 12 issues. The story itself was perhaps a bit too long and complicated, but to its success, it crammed in every single DC character from every single DC timeline, as the all-powerful Anti-Monitor destroyed DC's Infinite Earths, until 5 remaining Earths were joined together, so that every DC legend and hero now lived on just one single Earth. It was a mad dream become reality. And while not the first crossover event, it's arguably the best, with the deaths of The Flash and Supergirl being more heartfelt and impactful than any other superhero death since. And lest we forget, it gave birth to the terms post-crisis and pre-crisis as well. Number 3, The Watchmen. As mentioned earlier, DC had bought the rights to Charlton Comics' action heroes, thanks to Dick Giordano, the former Charlton executive editor, now DC's executive editor. Giordano tapped Alan Moore, the man who started the comic book British invasion of the 1980s with Swamp Thing, with bringing the Charlton heroes into the modern world. The story Moore crafted was beyond anything DC could have imagined, and they decided it should be its own book and not the Charlton heroes. Thus, the Watchmen were born, and with it, the concept of deconstructing superheroes. Comic books could now be considered legitimate fiction, as the all-too-humanly flawed Watchmen superheroes tried to fix societal problems their very existence exasperated. Much to the cringe of many superhero fans, Alan Moore, with fellow British artist David Gibbons, created the virtual benchmark for superhero comics. Number 2, The New Teen Titans. In 1980, 2 Marvel creators, Marv Wolfman and George Perez, left Marvel for greener pastures at DC. George had his sights on the Justice League, but Marv quickly changed his mind with reinventing the Teen Titans, introducing new and soon-to-be iconic characters like Cyborg, Raven, and Starfire, plus adding Beast Boy, or Changeling, into the mix. Soon DC's forgettable sidekick team became their premier book. For the whole decade, Wolfman and Perez made the New Teen Titans the hottest comic book on the market, rivaling Marvel's X-Men. even beating it in many fans' eyes. As the character drama was second to none, as was the action. Month in and month out, the new Teen Titans had some of the best writing and artwork in the industry, capped off by the mind-blowing Judas contract. Anything and everything Teen Titans these days is based on this epic run. Number 1. Batman the Dark Knight. Now, as beloved as everything is on this list, and off it, and as successful and game-changing as everything is on this list, and off it, none of them really compare to Frank Miller's Batman the Dark Knight. Back in the early 80s, Batman was one of DC's stars. But outside of DC, he was Adam West at best. That all changed as Frank Miller moved over from Marvel Comics and turned an aging, possible future Batman into the biggest, badass comic books had ever seen. The cheerful member of the Justice League, Superman's best chum, was replaced with an overbearing, workaholic, no-nonsense vigilante, even though he still held true to his values of not taking a life. And, as unbelievable as it sounds, Batman the Dark Knight was a must-buy book for Marvel fans. Marvel fans! In the 1980s! Because in just those 4 issues, for better or worse, by injecting grim and grittiness into superhero comics, Batman became the biggest brand in comics and beyond. The rest of Frank Miller's career is quite spotty, but his Batman the Dark Knight stands equal to Stan and Jack's Fantastic Four and Joe and Jerry's Action Comics as the best received and impactful comics ever. Now, I'm sure a lot of you disagree with some of the choices here and their order, but cut me some slack. Has there ever been so much output of this caliber in such a short amount of time? You can easily put any of them on the list, and in any order, and most people would be like, yeah, I get that. The 80s were just an amazing time of growth in comic books, which had been stunted since 1955 with the creation of the Comics Code. So yeah, show me your list, and I'm pretty sure I'll agree with it too. Unless you say something like Sonic Disruptors, in which case I'll have to slap you. Sorry, Mike. All right, I better stop talking or we'll be here all day. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this stumble down memory lane. And if you did, please subscribe and share because that's what all the cool kids are doing, and who doesn't want to be one of those? All right, put your hand down before I slap it.